And so, Nick, who is Harrison Dextrose?
Harrison Dextrose is Britain's greatest living explorer, at least in his head he is.
Okay, and what is In the Footsteps of Harrison Dextrose about?
It's the story of Alexander Gray, a 30-something loafer, who one night is bet by the object of his affection, Susie Goodenough, that he can't do Harrison Dextrose's great quest in a shorter time than the explorer managed. But if he does manage the feat, then she will sleep with him.
So how would you describe In the Footsteps of Harrison Dextrose?
It's quite hard to describe. Some of the influences on it, I guess, were Monty Python, With Nell and I, Vic and Bob.
And when is it published?
It's published on the 26th of April 2008 by the small but beautifully formed Legend Press.
Very good. And has anyone read it yet?
By my mum and my wife. Popbitch, the very groovy gossip website, has read it. And the cover on the book which they provided, bless them, is "This book is cooler than David Hasselhoff in a room full of otters."
Ah, very good. And if I may ask, why the watermelon?
Because pumpkins were out of season. This is the beginning of the book, how it began. It was my 18th birthday when I chanced upon Harrison Dextrose's The Lost Incompetent, a Bible for the Inept Traveller, little knowing that it would one day lead me to kill a man with a dead penguin. I regularly visited second-hand books in Glibley, my hometown, being a voracious reader of anything from fiction to manuals on making furniture, though I never actually made any. Each time I would rifle discreetly through the vintage pornography tucked into a hidden corner, dog-eared copies of Girl Illustrated and Lost in Bloomers, their covers featuring demure girls with dark curls and wry smiles who had forgotten to wear any clothes. It was while flicking through the familiar magazine covers, as a birthday treat to myself, that I found Dextrose's book. Perhaps someone had changed their mind about buying it and had dumped it there, or they'd had insufficient funds and all gussets and garters had won. I picked it out, realising that fate had meant me to read it. Fate did not let me down. The edges of the pages were worn and gently undulating. On the cover was a black and white photograph of the author's head. Harrison Dextrose stared defiantly into the camera, eyes alive with rancour. What manner of a man was this? A full, dark beard festered around his jawline and encroached on his cheeks. His hair was a mop of curls, greased down in a futile attempt at neatness. Tiny, broken blood vessels coursed between the blackheads on his nose. Flaunt the imperfections. I loved Dextrose on sight. The back cover blurb read, Harrison Dextrose is the last of the great British explorers. This is his first book, a cornucopia of strange incident, concerning his journey from Blithing Cove in England to Malulu in Agonasp, tracking down his former acquaintance, the philanthropist Livingston Quench. Dextrose names this his Dextrosian quest, a justly grandiose title. It will take him through lands rarely written about, because they're considered unfashionable. However, the author never ceases to find colour, even if he must inspire it himself, which he often does. Dextrose had clearly lived. The eyes said early 40s, the features said add 10. Stuff the Walter Raleigh of history books, who returned to these shores fawning and proffering root crops. Here was a real seafaring hero, ravaged by alcohol and sexually transmitted disease, who probably couldn't remember the name of the ruling monarch. Were his parents alive, I felt sure they would have long since disowned him. Was there anything of me in him, I wondered? I liked beer, and had always been an embarrassment to my parents. Inside, the publication date, 1973. My 18th occurred in 1983, a full decade later. I sought the foreword. I would always hook up with Livingston Quench when I returned to England from my groundbreaking travels. It beat talking to Mrs. Dextrose, and inevitably took in a public house and lecturing. We also shared a sense of humour. I saw plenty of myself in Quench, by which I'm not suggesting that we mated. Besides myself, Livingston Quench is the only human being I admire. What made him disappear off the face of the earth, I do not know. We had been imbibing in the crock of shit, niggled as usual by the crackerjack barnacle Wilson Niff, who could not take his alcohol. Friend Quench had had a trick up his sleeve to relieve us of the bowler-hatted mink. Editor's note, without wishing to curb the author's way with words and the interest in non-offensiveness, we have substituted Miss Dextrose's multiple fancies with the word mink, which seems harmless enough. That morning he had bottled his pungent first urine, treacle-coloured and of similar consistency, and had lightly carbonated it in his soda stream. When Niff excused himself, Quench swapped this foul brew with the mink as scrumpy. We could barely control our glee. Disgracefully, Niff sank the full pint in one and demanded to know whose round it was next. Quench took umbrage and stormed out, and that was the last I saw of him. No rumour, no postcard, nothing. Eventually I heard tell he had opened his own hostelry in Agonasp, in the middle of nowhere, and had named it Gossips. Gossips! Unutterable twaddle. Only a goose names his bar after the idle chatter of women. I assumed that devils were abroad, and set out to find quench myself, to void this slander. Thus began my great Dextrosian quest.